Basically, I went to this camp when I was going into my sophomore year in high school. This happened over the summer of 2016. My parents were really looking for me to lose some weight, and I think I was about 240 if I remember correctly going into that camp, which was very heavy. I don't believe I was as tall as I am now either, so I mean that was just even worse, that heavier and not even as tall which as I am now, which is 5'11", barefoot. But the thing is that, I mean, I was basically a fat kid. My parents saw things going in the wrong direction, so they wanted to turn it around. So they thought it was a good idea to send me to this camp, and I think it set them back a few $1,000s, and essentially took place over exactly 28 days or 4 weeks. And I went off to a place where there was a lot of other kids there. I want to say there was a few hundred kids, maybe that, for the summer. And they had like 2 sessions where I was in the second session, I guess you can call it. Some kids were there for a total of 8 weeks before that entire first session and second session. That would take place, in June and July. And then the second session was July and August. So that's the one I was in for 4 weeks. I ended up going from 240 to 220, so I lost 20 pounds. And for that reason, I would say it was a little bit of a success, and there was good things about it. But ultimately, I don't think it was a very great experience, and not something I'd recommend. Maybe you're a parent out there thinking about sending your kid to a fat camp. I actually would not do that, and we're going to be talking about what happened there. So when I first arrived at camp in July, I just remember being kind of culture shocked. You were like, is this really happening? I hadn't even been away from home pretty much that entire other than going on vacation, but I was with everybody. But this was the first time, almost like when you're going off to college, you're basically on your own, and this was going to be over 4 weeks. And worse yet, it's not like, you're going somewhere and it's something you want to do, like maybe going off to college and you got some new responsibilities and those are keeping you occupied. You can do what you want. No, this is you're going and you're going to be told what to do. It's a mini version of prison. Obviously, let's be real, it was not as bad as that, and certainly I'm not trying to say that, but it felt like that. I mean, you're going to go in there and be told what to do, and just this whole idea of like, wow, we're going to suffer losing weight. And I was just very depressed. Like the first few days, I'm like, this cannot be happening. But ultimately, I got over that kind of quickly and started to learn to kind of do things on my own. What they would have us do on the daily is a lot of exercise, as you can imagine, and we were eating clean. So in the first week, it was really tough. They had us running the mile basically the first time that you kind of went up to this field and you ran the mile pretty quickly. They're almost testing you to figure out where you were, and that one was tough. I think the mile for me was over 15 minutes or something absolutely awful, and just felt out of breath, out of shape. You couldn't do anything. I also remember my dad took me to Burger King before I even got there, so that was like the last hurrah, I guess, for me. And then it felt terrible running that mile, doing that. But also where you would work out and do the mile, where you did a lot of activities, they had this place called the Field. I know you can imply what that means, but it was a field out there with no shade. You're in the middle of the sunshine, and it's on top of another one of these hills. You got these rolling hills in Missouri where I was basically, and I can show a picture on screen of kind of what it would look like. And there's this deep woods, and you had to go up this massive hill to get there, and it was just really hot. And oftentimes that summer, especially, Midwest has really gotten hit hard by global warming and stuff like that. So basically, it was hotter than heck that summer, and there were a lot of records set for how hot it was and humid. So it was a pretty miserable time being up there. But yeah, every day you'd be going up to the field, you'd have to run the mile, you'd have to do that. You would spend several hours up there and then do other activities like, weightlifting kind of things, or they had these bands you would use essentially to do that. You'd also have to walk around the camp a lot. And another big thing is that they had no cell phones, and that was taken away. That was also a shock, right away. They took your phone, took your device, and you had to interact with other people. And I got to say one thing, that wasn't as bad as maybe it sounds now, because the thing is, like, once you got used to it and you started talking to people, I think you honestly got more happiness from that, as opposed to nowadays where everybody's chronically online and they always complain about how bad it is being always on your phone or always online. So honestly, looking back, that actually wasn't even bad, or it certainly for you, especially because you're already locked in. Where are you going to go? You're spending 28 days here. You're stuck at this camp. Might as well make the most of it and get to know whoever you're doing this with. And that was what I was able to do. And you kind of had to, because you didn't have any other choice. You weren't going to be making relationships electronically. You didn't have it. So you only got your phone, I think it was once a week, and you got that for like an hour, and they'd let everybody out by the lake. But that was pretty much it, man. They took your phone, took your electronics. So at that point, you did have to go back to kind of how people actually communicated, which was kind of nice in a lot of ways. But that was also, it led us to what you would do during the days. A lot of times you're going down to like classes and stuff too. They would have like an hour where you'd basically learn more about nutrition each day, and essentially just teach you on everything everything that's going on, what you need to be eating. And this was definitely, a lot of the advice was definitely pretty much on point. Now, I don't think they really preached what my kind of general rule is, but just try to mostly be eating that higher volume, lower in calorie. And they did preach that, but it was also about the specifics in terms of going into the macronutrients and stuff, telling you, to avoid as much salt, and here's the amount of fat and all that kind of stuff you need to eat, and the amount of calories as well. So really keeping it basically on par. And I mean, I'm not saying any of the advice was bad or anything like that, and but that was what you basically get nutrition training on top of it all. But I mean, a few of the things after that, once everyone got kind of comfortable with each other, it got pretty interesting. There were a few incidents definitely that went on at the camp. I remember one kid got in a shouting match with one of the counselors, and most of the counselors are pretty nice. You'd basically have everybody split into cabins, and I was in one cabin where I want to say there was about 10 kids with me, and I believe the cabin was big enough to be split into two. If anybody's gone off to camp, you might know or have seen that before. There was like a door and then a whole nother set of like maybe 8 to 10 people basically on the other side of the wall, and that was the situation. So I had a counselor on my side and then like 8 to 10 kids or something like that. Pretty big bathroom, and you're all in these bunk beds around a U-shaped thing like a horseshoe, and that was the way it broke down in the cabins. And so you got to know a lot of your cabin mates. But I remember we had one kid that he definitely got the brunt of it. He got picked on, and this kid just couldn't hang. He was very emotional, I guess, to say the least, and did kind of set himself up to be a target. But at that point also, you definitely saw, I want to say, bullying take place on this guy. Just didn't turn out too well for him, unfortunately. He ended up going home, which is one of the only, apparently I'm told, in the history of the camp, kids to go home early, in addition to another couple of kids I'll talk about in a bit. But this kid, I mean, he was getting bullied all the time because he had these bigger legs, and everybody would always give him grief for that. And basically, yeah, he ended up literally leaving. And I think our counselor didn't really, he was a cool guy, but I definitely felt like he probably could have done a little bit more to protect the kid at the time. But I guess he stuck out of it enough. And that was the thing. I mean, we saw this also. Some of the counselors, we had one guy who was pretty in shape, and he was mostly showing tough love. I think we all know about somebody who can do that, but he did definitely get on some of the kids. And there was one instance where this is a kid who ended up getting kicked out alongside a woman, but he basically got in a shouting match. I mean, dang near came to blows with the counselor, and there was a couple of rough instances there where basically you had the counselor having to fire off on this guy to basically keep in line. But ends up, it was funny because that same kid who was, I thought, in line, when he had talked back to this counselor, I thought was maybe disrespecting him. The thing was that he basically, ended up, let's say, doing an activity with a girl there in a discreet manner, but a terrible location, and they ended up getting kicked out. So that was the only two people to get kicked out apparently in the camp's history that I was told, because remember that other kid in my cabin ended up leaving on his own right. He just couldn't stand getting picked on. So that was the kind of thing that was going on there. I mean, it was a crazy situation. Another concern that we had, and a lot of people, I think, when they watched the South Park episode of the fat camp that happened, you see almost some very, very heinous activities. There wasn't anything that ridiculous going on. And to be fair, the camp organizers, I thought they were really trying to make the world a better place with their whole camp. From what I understand, they lose money actually running it, and they're just basically trying to get kids into shape and really teach them about nutrition. So I don't think it was a bad intentions, but I don't think this place ended up working because you don't teach the kids enough, or you couldn't really, when you lose weight, you have to do it on your own. You have to have that your own drive. And I think you kind of put somebody in a place where they can artificially succeed for a little bit, but when they get back, you haven't really forced them to train with dealing with the real world and force them to do it on their own and develop all that discipline. So I think things crumble down when they get put back out into the world. And so that was, for me, how it ended up looking out. And a sort of a comparison to be made is some people, when they go to prison for such a long time, they don't know how to actually function when they get out. And again, we're talking about some people, because some kids did keep the weight off, but some people, let's say for that example in the prison, they get out, they don't know how to behave, so they almost would rather go back in because you knew how to, you had your day, your life laid out for you there. Same thing with the military people. Some people get so sucked into that lifestyle that you don't know how to behave when you get out. I think it's the same thing with that weight loss camp and weight loss camps in general. What happens is you get in there, you get taught good habits and all that, but you're kind of forced to do it. And from that standpoint, you don't end up learning how to do it on your own. But another big story that was funny is that they had an alarm system on all the doors. So basically, when you walked in and you opened the door, it would start beeping, and it made this really high-pitched, very annoying beeping sound. You better believe if you left that door open, there was going to be hell to pay. People would get right on you. They would scream, they would yell, they would get angry at you, and you might get something thrown at you if you didn't close that door immediately. And it was also used as basically a system you couldn't escape or run out of the camp. Although, to be honest, of course, it is set up like a traditional, I hate to say it, but almost like a prison where you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. You're kind of out in a tough situation. So if you basically tried to escape camp, it would have been very difficult, or you would have had to go several miles before you're in any type of civilization. So they were pretty good about that. I mean, I honestly didn't think anyone was going to try to go anywhere, but that was the way. I mean, the alarm system was very, very annoying on the doors. And one other thing that didn't actually happen, contrary to what a lot of people's beliefs, is we didn't really have anybody sneaking stuff into camp. And this is where it also sucked at the same time to lose electronics and lose a little bit of that privacy, because basically everything that was sent into camp was like inspected. Same with your phone. You would literally throw it in a bag and not have it, which it sucked more than having the willpower to just not be on it, or whatever other system they could have used, because it's everything that you're getting sent in is getting looked through and getting inspected and all this kind of stuff. So it was a little bit disheartening from that standpoint, and you wouldn't really get away with anybody sending you junk food anyways. So it really wasn't that kind of type of situation where people think it is, like kids are sneaking in Snickers and stuff. That really didn't happen. As far as the treats we did get, I think there was one or two times we had something off the diet. There was one time we had regular Powerade after a really tough day and everybody was sweating outside exercising. There was another time we had like one s'more, and it was a s'more I probably would have had. It was all lower calorie items put together and roasted over the fire, and you got like that one treat. That was a very occasional thing, but that was about it as far as the junk food. Other than that, you're pretty much on obviously fruits, vegetables, meats, lean meats, and proteins, all the usual stuff you could expect in a pretty good balanced diet. But that was basically what you were on. And you also had the salad every day, kind of salad option. That was the only thing you'd be getting every day. And other than that, they would switch up the diet all the time in terms of what you were getting that day. So they try to at least serve something different. So at least give them credit for that. But yeah, man, it was really brutal out there. I mean, the exercises were tough. There were a few times where the counselors would get really on you and you had to exercise even harder. I think one time we were doing I don't know what it was, a dance activity or something really stupid, to be honest, along those lines, but it was burning calories, so I guess it's whatever. We were in like the main room, the main building where you actually had the dining hall. They cleared out all the tables. We're doing that activity, and I guess one of the counselors thought we weren't taking it seriously enough at some point, so they had us run to the gatehouse, which is the house that sits right next to the gate, and there's this long gravel trail that goes on the side of the lake all the way up to where that building is and where a lot of the hill is as well, that takes you up to the cabins or more of the cabins and then the field subsequently. So that's how the situation was. But you basically had to run that. It was several miles to run back and forth to the gatehouse and then back to the building and then all that. And that was all because, the counselor thought we were all joking around or something during an activity. So yeah, it was a little bit like military boot camp from that perspective. But overall, I thought a lot of the counselors were mostly nice. A lot of the organizers, I thought, had a really good vision. They would try to definitely get in touch with each kid as well and take things to a personal level and get to know you. Definitely had some good conversations with them. But ultimately, and I have to say this, as much as it hurts, I don't think weight loss camps work. I don't think this weight loss camp worked. When it ended up happening for me is I lost 20 pounds. We'd weigh in once a week, so I saw that progress. But I'm at 220 at the end of the 28 days, right? So a good 20 pounds in 28 days. But what ends up happening is, and I was less concerned too, let me be clear about how fast we lost. I don't think that was the reason that I ended up not winning this one. And I actually would say too, surprisingly, I never really felt hungry. I guess maybe because I was still growing or something like that. I know obviously we're on a good diet, which helped, but that wasn't all the reason. I know if I followed the diet now and tried to lose that weight that fast, I would be torched, but I still felt pretty good before and after. And anyway, or I should say really after, when I got into a cleaner diet and a little bit more into shape. But anyway, I got out of it and I ended up gaining the weight back, ended up falling into bad habits and ended up bouncing all the way up from 220 to over 305 pounds, which is where I maxed out in my junior year of high school and going into senior year. So it was not a good time for me. And I think the reason because, and I already explained a little bit earlier, but basically you don't learn. When you get put in a controlled environment, you don't learn how to do things yourself. You don't make the tough decisions. You don't tell the cookies and the Doritos in the cabinet no every day on your own. You don't prepare your own good meals and actually take that effort to do it yourself. You don't have the discipline to go out and exercise on your own and go learn those difficult habits and go enact that every single day. Instead, you're kind of forced to do it in that artificial environment, because the only way to really get out of it would have been to do something so terrible in its own right to where you're going to get judged judged harshly by the other campers to, let's say, fake an injury and sit out or spit out all your food or do something ridiculous to get out of whatever the activity is. Like, you're not realistically going to do that in that environment. So you really didn't have another choice but to follow this regimen. And the problem with that is you just don't learn how to do it yourself. So that's why I believe weight loss camps are setting you up for failure, in spite of the fact that I will support the organizers and say I thought they were doing something very genuine. They have a good vision. They're good people trying to do the right thing, but ultimately you're set up for failure because you need to do it yourself. Nobody out, like the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. Nobody is going to be able to do things for you at the end of the day in the long term, so you can get put in that short-term good environment, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't enact the habits yourself and that discipline and mindset that I've always preached in order to keep it off long term. So those are the problems that I had with the weight loss camp, and ultimately I'd say my time was, I didn't like it. First, going into it, I didn't like it. When I was getting out of it, I kind of learned I had a good social life there in terms of the other campers. I felt like I made some friends, and also probably the first experience in a mini almost dating situation with a girl there. So those were two valuable learning lessons for me, and I didn't necessarily hate my time because of that at the end of it. Plus, you're obviously a little happy losing weight, but definitely, man, if you're going into this situation, if you're a younger kid out there, younger guy, or if this is a situation, and I'm talking to any parents out there, you have a kid that's overweight, I would not recommend setting them to fat camp. I would try to figure out a way you can get them to push themselves, and a keyword themselves, to making the changes to better themselves, because you're just not going to be able to force somebody else to do it. And going back off it, if you're a kid in this scenario and your parents are thinking about sending you to fat camp, all I can say is best of luck. Try to survive that first week or two or whatever it is, and then you should be better off for those remaining weeks or whatever remaining time you have there. But definitely it's going to be difficult, but you'll get through it. So just to wrap things up, I definitely think you want to avoid weight loss camps if you can. I would say I was lucky that in my case, the camp I was at didn't have as many awful stigmas or heinous things going on that maybe some people have discussed. There wasn't anything that had you asking serious moral questions or stuff like that, but I just think that the conditions can make some people very depressed at the start. Plus, the fact that you're in a controlled environment is unrealistic for the long term, and that doesn't teach you how to do things on your own, which is ultimately the only way you're going to be able to keep weight off forever.